On the 1st of September 1939, German forces marched into Poland. Soon after, Winston Churchill's England declared war on Nazi Germany. World War II was a fact. Country after country fell prey under the new blitzkrieg technique. France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, and many more. Hitler's army swept across Europe like a sandstorm, swift, decisive, and merciless. Across the globe, Germany's ally, Japan, saw their opportunity to expand their empire faster, and with even more brutality, Japan crushed most of Southeast Asia. Up till now, the people of Australia had felt relatively safe, but then on the 19th of February 1942, Japanese forces attacked Darwin. Without warning, without mercy, the bombs fell from the sky for nearly 1 hour. Many lives were lost in the first aerial attack on Darwin. Australian Army intelligence never figured out the reason for the attack on Darwin and Northern Australia. Recently, when classification of many wartime documents was lifted, some very interesting information surfaced. Theories that the bombing of Northern Australia was a mere diversion for a much grander operation, in fact the operation, for the Japanese forces to invade Australia. Kangaroo Bluff on the eastern shore of Hobart in Tasmania hides more history than most people know. To most people that visit this historic site, it is merely an old battery point abandoned decades before World War II. What you don't know is that Kangaroo Bluff is one of the most important sites in Australia in this century. It is here, on the inlet to Hobart, that one of the most important events of World War II was played out. On the 19th of February 1942, 242 airplanes of Imperial Japanese Air Force raided Darwin in the Northern Territory twice, killing 243, injuring almost 400 people. Many people believed that Japan was going to invade Australia shortly after. Japan never did. Darwin was raided a total of 64 times between 1942 and 1943. To this day, these attacks without further action have puzzled the world and the historians. Recently, in January 2003, when classification of a number of wartime documents was lifted, light was shed on what really was going on in and around Australia and what the Japanese grand plan was all about. To invade Australia, not from the north, but from the south, from Tasmania. Invading and controlling Tasmania would give the Japanese a tremendous strategic advantage. They would control an island with a number of ports and airfields, all surrounded by water, making Allied troop and supply transport much harder and vulnerable to Japanese counterattack. The attack on Darwin was merely a diversion for the operation in and around Tasmania. How come there never was an invasion? What happened? It all started with a 14-year-old boy named Peter Johnson. Peter Johnson was at the time a keen Boy Scout, ornithologist and plane spotter. He never left home without his binoculars, a pen and a block of paper. During a solo campo trip that was part of his scout training spent on Bruny Island between the 28th of February and the 1st of March 1942, early in the morning of the 1st of March he spotted a plane. He could not recognise what model it was, but managed to get the registration number out of its wings. After arriving back home, Peter tried to tick off the registration number of the plane he saw in the Australian Aerial Registry Book. To his surprise, he could not find a match, not even a close one. This aroused his excitement. He had seen a plane that he could not recognise with registration number that didn't exist. During dinner that night, he told his father, Alfred Johnson, about his discovery. Alfred, being an ex-serviceman in the Defence Force, now working in the Royal Botanical Gardens, at least that was the cover. In fact, Alfred was the head of a small elite force of 4 men referred to as TSS, Tasmanian Special Services. Their task was simple: to seek out and eliminate any threat to national security in areas around Tasmania. Of course, no one knew of this except for a handful of national security men on the mainland. Not even Alfred's wife and son were aware. Later that night, Alfred contacted another member of his team, Christos, a radio and cryptography specialist. He confirmed he had picked up sonar sounds that could have come from a submarine off the shore in the Great Oyster Bay a few hours earlier that day. The hunt began, and the prey had no idea they had been spotted. The prey, Imperial Submarine 25, aka I-25, was under the command of Lieutenant Commander Meiji Tagami and had left Melbourne on the 26th of February for a number of reconnaissance flights, heading for Tasmania, and reached the Great Oyster Bay during the night of the 28th and launched the Eurosku E-14Y, aka Glenn, a 2-seater reconnaissance plane, early in the morning of the 1st of March, to take aerial images of Hobart and surrounding areas. After the return and the photographs had been developed, the analyst on I-25 discovered something concerning. While examining the photos of Kangaroo Bluff, they noticed the heavy activity in and around the area. They interpreted this as the Kangaroo Bluff battery point undergoing a massive upgrade. Even though they could not detect any cannons, they believed Hobart and Tasmania were preparing for the war to come closer. Tagami decides that another flight would be necessary, taking another lot of photographs. In reality, there were no plans of upgrading or modifying Kangaroo Bluff site. The large number of trucks and lorries were just using the large parking area as a depot, storing materials for the residential boom at Belrive. Unfortunately, for the lack of time, the pilot Fujita never took any photos of that area. Alfred gathered his team and set off to Great Oyster Bay and arrived there in the evening of the 2nd. They visited a number of beach houses, claiming they were marine biologists studying whales, asking the people if they had seen any in the bay the last couple of days. No one except for an old lady had seen anything unusual, nor a whale in the area. She claimed that she had seen what she thought was a submarine the previous night, when she was letting her dogs out early in the morning. Alfred and his team assured her that it was a whale. It was a clear night and it was a full moon. Shortly after midnight, I-25 surfaced and began what appeared to be maintenance work. In fact, during the loading of the plane the previous night, the wind had gusted while the plane was hanging on the crane. One of the wings crashed into the crane, doing major damage to the crane as well as the wing of the Eurosku plane. Tagami decided to take the risk of surfacing in the protected bay rather than doing maintenance in the open sea. They had to get the supplemental photos of the surrounding area of Kangaroo Bluff. The I-25 crew desperately tried to fix the plane wing, but it was hopeless. They did not have the fabric needed for the wing, and they did not carry any material of any kind of structural damage to the plane. Tagami then took a bold decision. He sent 2 men ashore to seal the sail of one of the sailing boats from a private residence nearby. Alfred and his men were watching, stunned how the little dinghy left the submarine heading for the shore. As soon as the 2 men stepped ashore, Alfred and his men arrested them.
祖父に若かった頃の話を聞かせてとよくせがみましたが、祖父はいつも話をはぐらかしてばかりでした。その祖父が亡くなった後で、祖母から話を聞かせてもらったところ、祖父が戦時中、 潜水艦の乗組員で敵軍の捕虜になったことを知りました。帝国海軍の潜水艦 I-25 号の偵察機のパイロットとしてオーストラリア、ニュージーランド、アメリカ西海岸の航空写真を撮影していたそうです。 I-25 号は真珠湾攻撃にも関与しており、太平洋各地で数多くの船を沈没させた潜水艦です。祖父は当時のことを思い出しては、暗闇の中で水浸しになって寒さに震えた悲惨な日々だったと語っていたらしいです。 I-25 号は1943年の9月3日に沈没し、祖父は生き残ったわずか数人の仲間と共に米軍の捕虜になりました。
After an hour of waiting, Tagami accepted the fact that his two men were not coming back. He submerged and headed for the open sea, still not knowing but assuming Kangaroo Bluff was being updated. A few months later, the war changed its course and Japan withdrew from further attacks on Darwin as well as reconnaissance flights over Australian territory. Today, Kangaroo Bluff is what it was in 1942, a quiet historic site on the eastern shore of the Derwent River, with people walking their dogs and exercising or just relaxing.